We are back. Welcome to the Mental Health, the last episode with myself and Holly. And what we're going to do today is look at depression and unpack that from a perspective of someone who suffers from depression. So what that looks like and how you can support someone with depression. So, for you, how would you define or describe depression in your own words?
God, you really hit me with a difficult question right at the beginning.
It's going
to be easy. How to define depression?
Words.
In my experience.
Yeah.
Well, the only way I can think of that is how I experience it, and it's difficult now trying to think how to put this into words.
I know, I'll break it down for you.
Yeah.
Okay. What does it feel like to start off with?
Okay. Well, then that's easy. Loneliness. It feels lonely. It feels incredibly lonely. Like there's no one or there's nothing in the world that is going to fix what's going on inside my head. It feels like it's never going to end. It feels like this overwhelming darkness. Like it's just incredibly it becomes incredibly difficult to do anything. Just basic tasks, getting out of bed in the morning, getting in the shower. Eating is a really difficult one for me. I know people struggle with food in different ways in terms of some may overeat. I tend to avoid eating altogether. And sometimes it goes a little while, maybe a few days, maybe a week or so before I even realize what's happening.
Yeah.
And by that point, it's like it's fully set in, and trying to claw my way out is a really overwhelming task. And so even that thought itself is so exhausting. Just trying to keep up with the thoughts in my head, and just like those really heavy feelings that sort of sit in your chest. It's just exhausting. And so getting through each day, it just builds and builds and builds. Yeah, it's difficult, and it's hard to explain when you haven't really experienced it yourself. Even my friends who have seen me in those darkest places, I think it's still difficult for them to try and understand exactly how I feel, because until you felt that yourself, it's a difficult one to explain, but that's my experience with it. If that helps anyone to understand.
Yeah, that's very well described. So with regards to thoughts, someone who is feeling depressed, what sort of thoughts would they have? Or speaking from your experience, if you feel comfortable in sharing, what would those thoughts look like?
There's a common theme in not feeling like I'm good enough for anything or anyone. Definitely a common thought is that people maybe don't like me, or I've done things to upset them and they don't care about me. They don't want to be around me, and it's the feelings of unworthiness are quite persistent, and feelings and thoughts that there's no way out, and that it'll never get better, and that nobody can help me, and these feelings will last forever, and this is what my life is going to look like for the foreseeable future. There's no way out, and I may as well give up. And those are common and frequent persistent thoughts that just really weigh you down, and that I feel like those are almost those feelings that kind of sit heavily on you. Yeah, I think those are the common ones.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. When you mentioned before, I think about triggers. So for you, when do you start noticing that maybe you are going down that slippery slope?
So number one would definitely be sleep. Sleep is a huge one for me. Everybody's different in terms of how much sleep they need to function. I'm somebody who needs a lot more sleep, rest, and when that's broken or interrupted, and I'm tired, that's when I start to spiral. I will begin isolating, and again, these are sometimes things that I don't pick up right away. I'll start withdrawing from my friends, or when I was on the boats, I'd kind of spend a lot more time in my cabin on my own, because I guess the thought process behind that is that I don't want to be a downer on the rest of the crew or those around me. I don't want to have to waste what energy I do have trying to keep up a smile on my face or laughing with the crew. That takes up so much energy, which when I already have little, how do you get through the rest of the day? So withdrawing and isolating is definitely one of them. So I try and sleep as much as I can, try and rest as much as I can. And yeah, just then when it comes back to food and things like that, when I start eating less and I lose my appetite, and those are sort of the starts of a bad time to come. And I'm still learning now those triggers, those things that sort of set it off, or at least noticing early days so I can intervene and try and sort of help those things so it doesn't get as bad as it has been in the past.
So let's talk about our industry. Working on board when you have to put a smile on your face because you've got guests on board, you have to show up for work, and a lot of it is around community because we eat together. How would someone pick up the signs of depression when they have to fit into that lifestyle of yachting?
I think with yachting in particular, it's an interesting one because we spend every waking moment together. I think it's quite easy to tell how someone is, how they act and behave in a normal setting, how they interact with you on a normal day when they're feeling good, when things are fine. You can kind of judge their energy, and you might not think but as soon as there's a slight change in someone's energy or behavior, or just if anything changes at all, be it good, bad, whether they become sad or now suddenly they're angry and irritable, or I feel like any slight change in behavior is a cause to ask yourself the question, or better yet, ask that person if everything's okay. We do have to put on this front for guests and boss and all that, and a lot of people will carry on that front when they're in the crew mess and around the crew, but because we're with each other 24/7, you will notice those small changes, and they might be minor. I think you are far better off asking the question. They might brush it off and say everything's fine, or whatever, but wouldn't you rather be brushed off and say, oh no, everything's fine, nothing's wrong, whatever, then keep the question to yourself and keep guessing and wondering, oh, are they okay? Like, they seem a bit off recently. Their energy's changed and shifted. I should probably ask them. Well, I promise you, it's a far better option to just ask the question. There is no harm in asking the question. And it might mean the world to someone who's really struggling to reach out for help or talk about how they're feeling. And if you open that conversation, you're inviting them to trust you and to, you know, not have to carry everything themselves. Yeah, with working on boats, it's tough, and most people, myself included, I'd keep it to myself until my cabin door was shut, and even sometimes then not even in the cabin, just, you know, you got that tiny little space in the bathroom that's yours, you lock the door, and that is yours. That became my safe space. And slowly but surely I had some very good crew who made me feel safe and allowed me to sort of open up a bit more and feel like there were places other than that tiny little bathroom that I could be myself and I didn't have to put on a front. And yeah, that means the world to me.
Another thing I want to mention with regards to that is, I know it takes courage for the person to reach out and say, are you okay? Because they're dealing with their own inner thoughts. They might be thinking, she's off or he's off because of me. I've done something wrong. And they're too scared to check in where it's got nothing to do with you. So I think what you're saying is just ask anyway, because you're going to find out the answer rather than tormenting yourself what is actually going on. And I just want to remind the listeners that if you do get brushed off, don't take it personally, but please show up again and check in with that person. Like, you just got to be consistent and keep checking in, because as you've highlighted before, you feel alone, you feel that you're uncared for, no one cares about you. But by showing up and saying, how are you? You will get eventually more feedback from that person in terms of how they're going. And as you said, it makes the world of difference because it shows that that person cares.
Yeah. I always think when you just mentioned there about being consistent and, you know, you get brushed off, but if you can, try really hard not to let that, you know, be it, and just keep going back. And I always think back to the story which you've told a couple of times before, when you worked in the prisons and you kept going back to the guy every single day and asking to have a chat, and you went back again and again and again, and eventually, you know, he went for a walk with you and he opened up a little bit. And I feel like that's so important, and it's such a good example. And I feel it now as well. So I'm land-based now, and my housemate, she's not a yachty. I didn't know her before, and when I moved in, I was very open about, you know, my mental health. It's become a normal topic of conversation. And not too long ago, I was in a pretty bad way, and I couldn't get out of bed, and I didn't leave my apartment for about just over 2 weeks. But every single day she had asked me if I wanted to go for a walk. Every day without fail. She would ask me if she wanted to come out with the dog and would go for a walk, and every single day I said thank you but no, and she'd say okay, didn't make a big deal about it, and went on her way. And then there was one day when she said, I'm going for a walk, do you want to come with? And I don't know what switched, but I said yes, I'd love to go for a walk. And it was amazing. And also, as a side note to that, she didn't make a big deal about it either. It wasn't a big deal that I said no every day, and it certainly wasn't a big deal when I said yes either. It just became a normal thing, and when I went along with that walk, it was like, you know, it was like any other day. And that meant so much to me, that somebody just came back every single day to ask me if I wanted to be included with her plans. And I think that's it. Too often, I think people get discouraged when they get brushed off or someone says no every single time, that they stop asking, they stop inviting people out because they just think they're going to get rejected again and again. And I know that hurts, but if you can try and think what it feels like on the flip side, is that person so badly wants to be able to say yes and so badly wants to join in and hope that it will make them feel better, but just does not have it in them, has not enough energy to get up. You know, there's so many things in that between being asked to go out and actually going out. They have to then get out of bed, they have to have a shower, put clean clothes on, eat something. You know, it becomes such a huge task when really all they're saying is, do you want to go for a coffee? You want to go for a walk? To some, it may seem really simple, but to others who are really struggling, that process is so overwhelming that it's far easier to say no and stay in bed. So to keep feeling included every single day when you're consistent like that, I can't stress that enough. It is so important. And yeah, you might just make somebody's day, week, year. And yeah, if there's one thing that anyone can take away from this is just try your best not to feel discouraged when somebody says no. It doesn't harm you to keep asking.
Yeah. Fantastic. Now, Hol, I want to speak to you about what advice could you give from a captain's or heads of department perspective if crew are struggling with mental health, and then from a more personal perspective, such as your friends, what could they do to help and show their support?
Well, the first one's a difficult one. I can definitely understand that it is a tricky position for a captain or heads of department to be in, because they have to think of the crew as a whole. And yes, when somebody, and I'll take myself as an example, I know what I can be like when I'm not in a good way. I'm certainly not the most fun to be around. So you do have to think about how one person's energy can affect the whole crew. And I'm well aware of that. But I think it's super important for heads of department and captains to make this a normal conversation. It's easy enough to say I have an open door policy but never invite the conversation in. You know, it doesn't, if that makes sense. You can say it, but then you're just putting all that pressure on the individual, and it's already difficult enough to talk about things and open up and trust and feel safe. Now you're also asking them to take the first step and come forward to talk to a captain or, you know, heads of department about the issues. But in my mind, what do I even say? What do I say when I walk into that office or into the bridge and I'm like, hey, by the way, I'm super depressed. Like, that's not a conversation that will ever happen. I think people need to make this conversation normal, so that when you're in those situations, like let's say we're in the bridge on passage and you've got the captain in there and you're a lookout, you're just chatting, you chat about all sorts of stuff, the most random stuff, and then things do get personal. It's happened on every watch ever. You know, if someone has noticed a shift in behavior or energy, to just have that normal conversation, just be like, hey, I've noticed, you know, you're not eating in the crew mess these days, or, you know, you seem a little bit down and a bit flat, you know, is everything okay? Now you've opened up that conversation for somebody to answer and say, you know what, no, XYZ's happened, you know, I've got some bad news from home or something like that. And you start that conversation, it becomes normal. that is the one thing that I think captains, or I would hope captains and heads of department could do, because then you could discuss together how you can make it work for everyone and how they feel comfortable. Perhaps then you can sit your department down and just have a chat together so that everyone's on the same page. Or it can just be a personal thing where, let's say the captain or chief officer says, okay, once a day or once every couple of days, we're going to have a check-in, and just you and I can have a chat somewhere private, and we can just, keep on top of this. I don't asking too much of someone in a position of power. It's just trying really hard to make it as normal as possible. Then from my own, from, as you say, from a more personal perspective, in terms of my friends and family, again, that conversation, making it normal, open and honest is really important. And just knowing that, we've said this in our previous video, you're not there to fix or give the answers. That's not your job. Also, I would never expect somebody to fix all my problems. But listening is so important. And as you mentioned before as well, listening is a skill that one can learn. So I'd be interested if you know the best way. I wouldn't know how to explain or how to describe the best way to just listen. It sounds silly, it sounds simple, but there is definitely a skill, and it would certainly help if more people tried to learn it as well.
Yeah, that's why it's in my leadership course, Holly. Learn how to listen, and it's called active listening. So what we find naturally, I think this is what happened to me actually in the prison system when my first day when I had to do group work facilitation, and I'm hearing these horrific stories, and I'm trying to process that information, and then I'm trying to think about what the next topic I have to teach. And I've got this voice that's got commentary happening on what I'm hearing, and I'm looking around the room all at the same time. So it's like total overload. There's lots going on. But in terms of active listening, it's got a lot to do with being present and in the moment, and just focusing all your attention on that person and noticing the body language, the facial expression, the tone of voice. And what we find atypically is we tend to wonder, because we live in a world full of distractions. So we might go, oh, I wonder what I'm having for dinner tonight, or yeah, that's an odd thing to say. I wonder why she said that. And then, oh yeah, I can think of a time in my life where this happened, and you on another time, another different story, and you've lost the conversation and what that person is saying. So in order to stay present, it's very important to practice the skill of summarizing. And you can start off with saying, I hear that, and you're probably going to laugh at me because you're like, oh, I've heard her say that in the counseling sessions. Like my friends and my boyfriend, they're like, don't use that on me. But things like, yeah, I hear what you're saying is, and then just summarize what you just heard, because that is a clarifying process. And then what the person can either do, they might say, yes, that's exactly how I feel, or no, actually it's a bit like that. And then it keeps you on topic.
Yeah, that's so interesting. It's like repeating back to someone what they, I guess it helps you as well to actually, force you to listen to what they're saying as well. No, that is interesting. I've never heard it explained like that. But you can definitely tell when someone is engaged in listening to what you have to say, or if they're distracted. Maybe they've got their phone there and they're looking at notifications that keep popping up, or they keep looking elsewhere, or having conversations off with someone in the background. That's not an environment for someone to feel like they're being heard.
No.
So
And
yeah,
another,
definitely
yeah,
a good one.
I was going to say a conversation that we had in our group coaching session in the membership, and how one of the members shared about her friend, and she would share a story, then get interrupted, and then just talk about herself.
Yeah.
So that is something
that's so common as well. It's so common these days, and it's really sad. It's just, I guess you just have to become more self-aware, and maybe take a conversation one day and maybe try and put your phone away, and yeah, just one conversation with one person, just try and be there fully, 100% present, and see how the conversation shifts and becomes more authentic and organic. And yeah, that'll mean a lot to the other person, and I'm sure you'll get a lot from it as well. Yeah, that's an interesting one. I was just thinking of something else that a friend or a crew member could do, and you're going to laugh at this as well, but when you ask the question, how are you, in the morning, it's like, hey, how are you doing? I feel like that phrase has morphed into more of a greeting than an actual question. Some people may think, oh, but I asked them how they were and they said good or fine or whatever. Something I've noticed, for a long time, is how whenever you ask me how I'm doing, when you never ask me how I'm doing, you always say, how are you feeling? And how many times have I just said, I'm okay, or I'm fine, or I'm good? And every single time, first of all, you laugh at me, and then you say, that's not a feeling word. And it really does force you to sit. It helps the person sit there and actually think, figure out how are you feeling, and then express it. And then it would help the other person to understand kind of where they're at. Because in the past, when you've asked me how I felt, sometimes it may be overwhelmed. That's a feeling. Sometimes it might be I'm numb. And you said that to me as well. Numbness is a feeling. And it's a really good indication then you keep asking that question, how are you feeling, to kind of just monitor what I'm feeling, when I'm feeling it. Yeah, I think that's just such a useful thing. If people could try to switch out the how are you, because unless you genuinely are asking the question and you're finishing that sentence with how are you doing really, how are you today, how are you doing compared to yesterday, if you're just saying how are you as like a passing fleeting comment, that's not inviting an honest answer. That's just if you walk down the street and said, hey, how are you doing? And someone actually stopped and went, you know what, today I'm having a really bad day. You'd be shocked. You'd be like, oh, whoa, I didn't actually mean it. So you have to think about what you're actually saying. So if you switched out the how are you for how are you feeling, that actually is asking for a reply, and an honest reply. So it could be an interesting way to try and
experiment with. Imagine you just swap it out, and you're used to hearing someone say, how are you? I think on the first instance, they won't register you saying how you're feeling. They'll just hear, how are you? And then once they do register, how they respond. And yeah, as you said, fine and good are not feeling words. Tell me what a person looks like, feels like, is doing when they're fine. You can't describe it. And the same with good. You can't describe it.
So it's definitely, and again, you asked me that question, how are you feeling? And I'm now in the habit of telling you exactly what I'm feeling and when I'm feeling it. So yeah, it just becomes habit as well, because you're consistent in asking me that question and you expect an honest reply from me. then I have got into the habit of being honest and actually going, looking inward and being like, okay, actually, how am I feeling? What am I actually feeling right now? Because that's kind of like a present thing as well. It's not a general, question. It's how am I feeling right now in the present moment? And yeah, super important to just be more specific with the questions, and consistent. So yeah, these are small things that people could do to make someone else feel like they are cared about, like they're being heard and being seen. And yeah, these small things can be the biggest for someone like myself who suffers from depression, frequently. And the more you notice the signs and symptoms, the quicker you act with things like these small questions and small gestures, making someone a cup of tea, or just knocking on their cabin door and just sticking your head in and saying, inviting them into the crew mess for a cup of tea, inviting them back into society. It's so important.
Another thing I wonder, if people don't truly ask how one is feeling when they might know that they suffer from a mental health issue, that they're in fact scared in terms of the answer, finding out the answer, because they don't know what to do with that information. So if someone responded saying, no, actually, I feel really depressed, I'm not good. And I think there is a natural panic response that happens for them, thinking, oh my gosh, I'm out of my depth, out of my comfort zone. I don't have the skills to support them. I don't know what to do. So what would your response be to that?
Yeah, I mean, I know that that's difficult. That's a difficult one. And it's definitely something that I know a lot of people worry about. I think number one is also to remember that you need to take care of yourself first, and there are boundaries that you must set. You don't need to take on one person's all of their stuff, but there are things in place that you can do if you are genuinely really concerned for someone's well-being. You've got your heads of department, you've got your captain. There are people that you can and should reach out to if you are genuinely concerned. And then I think gently pushing as well for somebody to seek help. It took a long time for me to reach out to you. I had friends that kind of pushed me in that direction for a long time. If there's something that you feel you could do, you can get online and try and find, someone. It's almost like doing the hard work for them. I had a friend, before I reached out to you, Karine, I had a friend who gave me the contact details for someone that they were seeing, and in the first instance actually made an appointment for me. Doing those hard things, which actually was fairly easy for them, all I had to then do was turn up. And that set off a series of events where here we are today, and I'm now happy to talk about it and things like that. It's just to know that you don't need to take it all on. But yeah, find help for yourself as well. Do some research. If you can educate yourself enough on what somebody is feeling, if it's depression, if it's anxiety or whatever, if you can equip yourself with enough information that you can potentially advise on techniques, we've been focusing on anxiety and techniques to help that. If you knew a quick technique for helping someone who's going through an anxiety attack, you can calm them down in the here and now. It didn't take much for you just did a bit of research and tried a technique on someone, and it worked. And then you can go through it. It's just taking it step by step as well, and having the conversation. Are they happy for you to reach out to the head of department or the captain? Or if you don't want them involved, to find a professional that they can speak to and get help from. Yeah, I mean, I know it is difficult, but on the flip side, as the person who's suffering from depression or anxiety, it's crippling. And yeah, I don't know how else to say that.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for your honesty, Hal. On the topic of asking for help, and you said that it took you a while to reach out, at what stage do you think someone should seek professional help?
Well, if I could do it all over again, probably about 10 years ago. I think when I first realized that I couldn't do it, I'd like to say when I realized I couldn't do it on my own, but that was already a belief that I had to do it on my own. So maybe when I thought that I had to do it on my own, should I have realized that that is not the case, and that had someone told me, or had we gone through this entire process of someone noticing that my behavior changed, someone asked me the question if I was okay, perhaps prompted me to seek help, had someone then told me that I didn't have to do it on my own, I would have liked to have reached out then, before it got to breaking point and hitting rock bottom and being in some of the worst places in my life. You know, it didn't need to reach that point before I realized that my life is worth something, and asking for help is not the worst thing in the world.
And it gives pleasure to the other person to help as well. So a lot of people think, I don't want to be a burden, so I don't want to ask for help. But you got to remember that it's a pleasure. Like, it's a gift to be able to help someone else. So you're offering them a gift. The other thing, last question, I promise. I wanted to ask, and then we've had a couple of comments with regards to feedback, and one of them is, how do you turn down the volume, I like to say, on the inner critic? So that voice that's saying you're not good enough. What tools and strategies have you used?
First of all, I'll start by saying, still working on it. Very hard. I think a recent favorite would be reframing. Reframing the situation. I know quite often you ask me to think of all the, I like to list off all the negative things about myself, or maybe negative situations that are happening in my life. And you like to counterattack with, okay, list all the good things about yourself, or list all the good things that are happening in your life, or the things that you've achieved, or when somebody has shown you kindness. And it's just, I guess you can look at it in terms of scales, pros and cons. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you can never have those negative thoughts, but if you can just tip the scales the other way and maybe list one extra thing that was good or positive, can just, reframe the situation. Can just shift that, or slightly break that spiral of negative thinking, and it forces you to realize that people do love you and people do care, and they have shown you that in the past, and it will happen again. So just not losing hope, and knowing that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. It will be good again, and the thoughts will die down eventually. Trying not to add to the pressure of I like to sort of yell back at myself for thinking the way I do, and you know, the voices they get louder and louder and louder. Just to be kind to myself and know that, you know, I'm okay feeling the way I do, and they will quieten down eventually. But yeah, if you can just, when it comes back to those scales, if you can just list the good things, the positive things that people say and do, and yeah, that helps me.
I want to highlight the word that you've used there, eventually, because therapy is not a quick fix. It takes time. As you know, you've been in therapy for, is it a year and a half or longer?
It's just over a year and a half.
Okay, so you've been in therapy for a year and a half and you're still learning. And
Yeah.
so it requires patience and also kindness towards yourself.
Mm-hmm. And it's not, doesn't just go uphill either. It's not linear.
Yeah.
Some days are good, some weeks are really, really good. And then I get frustrated when things aren't, you know, momentum doesn't keep going, and maybe I have a bad day or a bad episode, and you know, it feels like it's undoing all the work. But if I think back to where I was before I reached out to you a year and a half ago, I mean, I know now I can sit here and say now that I'm a different person, and I've learned so much. And there is still so much to learn, but yeah, I've made that commitment to myself, and yeah, I wouldn't change it for anything.
Amazing. And you know me, I love giving homework tasks. And that's the thing with therapy. I think it's important to do your own work as well. And as you said, you do a lot of research, but also self-reflection, and that can come through sort of a journal, or it can come through a collage or drawing. But it's important for you to be able to put your thoughts on paper and to process it and put your learnings into action. So it's planting the seed in therapy, and you've said about learning about reframe and how it's helpful. So then it's not just applying that skill in your hour session, but taking it out there in the real world. And when you are struggling, trying that particular technique. And I know in the drawing that you did for me, you drew the toolbox. We work on our toolbox, our skills, and there's not a one size fits all. So meditation is not going to work for everyone. Journaling is not going to work for everyone, but it's important to embrace it with an open mind, be curious, and just try and see what works for you. Like, what's the worst that's going to happen?
Yeah, and I can say that as well. People love to give quick fixes or remedies for things that might help them. You know, go for a run, go do some exercise, go do some yoga. You know, it comes from such a good place, and we understand that. But one thing that I would hope you would understand, or they would understand, is that doesn't work for everyone, and it doesn't work for me. So doing yoga, I hate doing yoga. So doing yoga when I feel bad is literally the last thing that I want to do. Things that do help are journaling, and I have a certain playlist that I like to listen to. It calms me down, it soothes me. Yeah, just small things that I found that help me. So that's another thing that someone can do, and say, well, you know, when you are feeling bad, or not even when it's only you feeling bad, but you know, what is something that you do to help you? How do you get out of your head and things like that? If you find out on a good day, then when they're having a bad time, you can gently encourage them to get back into those things. So, because they're often things that you forget to do. Everything goes out the window. Oh my God, nothing helps ever. And then, you know, to be reminded, oh, have you gone back to your journal? Have you listened to that playlist? Oh, and then I realized I hadn't listened to that for a long time. put my headphones on, I listen to it, and suddenly it takes me back to when I got into those healthy routines, and calms me down, and it brings me back to, you know, the present moment, and then everything just starts to calm down a little bit more. So yeah, if you come back to the toolbox, is everyone's going to be different, and it's just about trialing a bunch of them and finding what works for you. And finding what doesn't work for you is really useful.
Yeah.
Because then you know to leave that one away, you know, aside. Now I don't have to feel guilty when someone says, have you been out for a run or a walk or exercise? And that has never helped me in the past. So I don't have to feel guilty when I say, no, I haven't been for a run, or I haven't done yoga.
Yeah. No, yeah.
So it's more, I don't have to then feel extra pressure to do those things, because I already know that they don't help me. So I tend to stick to the ones that do. And yeah, so it is trial and error, and it is a process, it's a journey, but I promise you'll come out the other end a better person.
Well, I remember actually, maybe it was a year ago, and we discussed before about the feelings of hopelessness, and you feel that nothing's working, nothing is going right, you're in a deep black hole. And one of the comments I made in therapy, I said, I want you to start using a different color in your journal. So when you have a good day, use a different color. And you were like, hold on. And then I said, no, you need to count how many good days you have had. And so you did that exercise, but you were already doing that unconsciously. I think at the corner of your journal, each day that was positive, you're writing, I'm good enough. And then you said to me,
yeah,
oh my gosh, I've actually had more good days than I thought I did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember that. I remember that so clearly. Yeah, I used to, well, I still do now, but I write you are enough at the bottom of a page if I've had a good day. And sometimes I find myself writing like bad things in my journal, but I'll still end it with saying that. And it's usually, it's almost like an indication. It was subconscious. I didn't even know I was doing it, but it basically was me marking, you know, a good day versus a bad day. And when I did go through my journal and I counted them, I was shocked at how many more good days I had than I did bad days. And I had no idea. So yeah, it's all learning, and it's all a part of life, but it doesn't have to be as heavy and as dark as it may feel. I just hope if this, I said it in the last one, if this could help one person, or if it can help somebody who is trying to help a loved one or a crew member or anyone in their life, then I feel like I've done my job.
Yeah. That's amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time and for having the courage to speak up. And we hope that someone can walk away with an aha moment from this conversation and perhaps approach someone differently who is struggling. And maybe you want to try out asking someone, how are you feeling, instead of how are you? Or maybe you want to try out active listening and see if you notice a change in your relationship with your friend, partner, or colleague. But that's totally up to you. But if you do try it and you notice something different, please contact Holly and I and let us know, because we love celebrating wins and hearing from you as well.